So Donald Trump just held a big rally at Mount Rushmore. Now, while he was there, he gave a really big speech. And what's interesting is during this speech, he actually touched on what a lot of different conservative voices out there are talking about. And that is this left-wing ideology that is attempting to basically tear apart the nation and fundamentally change America. Now, I'm sure many of you listening are totally against that, and you hear it all the time from different voices here online, but this time we're actually hearing it from the president, and he's calling it out specifically this time, addressing all the major points about this ideology that, where the problems lie, and he's kind of facing it head on. And you know what? I don't agree with everything he says all the time, and you shouldn't either. You should, take each issue as it comes from him. Sometimes, yes, he exaggerates a lot, and sometimes, yes, it does seem like he's full of himself. But a lot of times he does say a lot of valuable things and does put into place a lot of valuable policies. And, here I think he hit the nail right on the head with this group he's referring to. And he really addressed a lot of the problems with it, summed it up well, and a lot of times he's clipped or things are pulled from him and made to look a certain way. But I want to just read the transcript here of certain parts of his speech here where he addresses that and then look at the news media's response to it, because it's very interesting how they took what he said versus how I took what he said when I was reading this. So let's go through some of those parts that Trump was saying first. So in his speech, around the 7-minute mark here, he says, 1776 represented the culmination of thousands of years of Western civilization and the triumph of not only spirit, but of wisdom, philosophy, and reason. And yet, as we meet here tonight, there is a growing danger that threatens every blessing our ancestors fought so hard for, struggled, they bled to secure. Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities. Many of these people have no idea why they're doing this, but some know what they are doing. They think the American people are weak and soft and submissive, but no, the American people are strong and proud, and they will not allow our country and all of its values, history, and culture to be taken from them. Sound pretty accurate? I think so. We'll continue. One of their political weapons is cancel culture, driving people from their jobs, shaming dissenters, and demanding total submission from anyone who disagrees. This is the very definition of totalitarianism, and it's completely alien to our culture and to our values, and it has absolutely no place in the United States. This attack on our liberty, our magnificent liberty, must be stopped, and it will be stopped very quickly. We will expose this dangerous movement, protect our nation's children from radical assault, and preserve our beloved American way of life in our schools, in our newsrooms, and even our corporate boardrooms. There is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. If you do not speak its language, perform its rituals, and recite its mantras, and follow its commandments, then you will be censored, banished, blacklisted, persecuted, and punished. It's not going to happen to us. He says, make no mistake, this left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution. In doing so, they would destroy the very civilization that rescued billions from poverty, disease, violence, and hunger, and that lifted humanity to new heights of achievement, discovery, and progress. To make this possible, they are determined to tear down every statue, symbol, and memory of our national heritage. Crowd responds, not on my watch. Trump says, true, that's very true. That is why I'm deploying federal law enforcement to protect our monuments, arrest rioters, prosecutors. Okay. Talks about what they're going to do with the statues, preserving them, all that stuff. He then goes on to talk about each one of the, presidents represented there on Mount Rushmore and the impact they had, and sums it up with saying, no movement that seeks to dismantle these treasured American legacies can possibly have a love of America at its heart. It can't happen. No person who remains quiet at the destruction of this resplendent heritage can possibly lead us to a better future. The radical ideology attacking our country advances under the banner of social justice, but in truth, it would demolish both justice and society. It would transform justice into an instrument of division and vengeance, and it would turn our free and inclusive society into a place of repression, domination, and exclusion. They want to silence us, but we will not be silenced. Now, all of that. If you really listen to what he said there, it seems really spot on with what is happening with a select group of people on the left. Now, when I say the left, I am sure that this does not represent every single person who would consider themselves left. But somewhere on the left, more towards the far side, there is this ideology that does seek to fundamentally change America. We heard this from the Obamas. They fundamentally want to change America. That means change it from its roots to make it something different than what it was founded on, right? They want to change the ideals and our beliefs here in what we, form ourselves as a country. And he calls out all the different parts of this. He calls out cancel culture and explains, like he said, if you don't recite its mantras, follow its commandments exactly to the T, and you've seen this, you've seen it with different celebrities, you've seen it with different voices online. If they don't follow their group's ideology to the letter, then bam, canceled. And yes, they'll come out and apologize and try to, help soften the impact as much as they can, but still canceled. And the mark's changing all the time. It's getting harder and harder to follow all those exact rules because they're constantly changing. And, everybody's all together until cancel culture comes for them, and then, they need help. So he calls that out. He calls out the attempt to change history in that we only focus on the bad and we're trying to get rid of all the good. And the whole point is to just teach children and indoctrinate people on how bad America is and how all the negatives of it, when in reality, people are nuanced. There's different, all the people throughout history, you couldn't look to a single person as a good person if you just judge based on the bad, because every single person throughout history has done something wrong, and all these people in a history have most likely done something good as well. Different levels within each person, yes, but there's good and bad in every single person. So it's important to teach all of that, and he addresses how they're trying to tear that down and points out that, America is under fire from this, and there is a big move to change how things are here. And that's not him saying that he wants to, keep us from having change, but it's to say that we want to preserve the values that we were founded on, right? And I thought that, like I said, there's not much I can add to it because he addressed all the points very well and covered all the topics there. But what I found interesting was the media's response to his speech. And I'll explain. Let's go through it here. So this one's from CNN. They title it, "Trump Tries to Drag America Backward on a Very Different July 4th. Very interesting way to phrase that. CNN. On a very different 4th of July holiday, when many Americans are wrestling with the racist misdeeds of the country's heroes and confronting an unrelenting pandemic with surging cases, their commander-in-chief is attempting to drag America backward, stirring fear of cultural change while flouting the most basic scientific evidence about disease transmission." Okay, so they kind of accuse him of 3 different things all in that first paragraph, and we need to unpack each one. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to keep seeing arguments from them. So let's talk about the pandemic one first of all, because they love doing that. So the first issue with the pandemic attacks that CNN is putting out is they're super concerned about his rallies and disease transmission with people grouping together at his rallies, and thereby placing the blame on him, saying he has no concern for other people's health because people are gathering at these rallies. Now, if you're going to hold to a belief that people grouping up together in large groups should not be warranted because you believe that the virus is so awful that people should be forced not to group together and you shouldn't have that, then you should also be very upset about the protests and people getting out protesting what they believe in. I personally believe that, let the protesters protest, let the people that want to rally. But based on CNN's hold here, they're doing a double standard. It's very clear. They're trying to play it off with, these people were doing it properly, these people weren't. No. Just stop. You are holding a double standard here. You prefer the riots, you don't prefer his rallies. It's pretty clear. You're not hiding that from anyone. Secondly, with, scientific evidence about disease transmission. We've seen the death rates going down. I did a whole video on this. You know what? I'll put a card out here up in the top so you can watch about how the cases of the virus are increasing, but we have increased testing. There are more reasons for people going in to get tested. We're increasing that, our capabilities in that. Meanwhile, the death rate's going down. So yes, we have more cases, but we're also finding more cases because we're testing more people. That's a whole nother story to begin with. But again, I'll link you a video to that so it addresses that topic. But that's not the only thing they accused him of here right in the very first part. They also said that, many Americans are wrestling with racist misdeeds of the country's heroes, and that the commander-in-chief is attempting to drag America backward. So they're trying to say that by the stuff he was saying in his speech here, he is culturally dragging us backward to, I guess, a more racist time period, which is not at all what he was saying in any parts of his speech. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It was trying to bring us together against stuff that's trying to change the values our country was founded on, which again is about, everyone being treated equal and people being unified in one country together, regardless of where they're from and what they look like. So they continue, in a jaw-dropping speech that amounted to a culture war bonfire, President Trump used the backdrop of Mount Rushmore to frame protesters as nefarious left-wing mobs that intended to end America. Those opponents, he argued, are engaged in a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. Hold on a second. You are saying that he used this speech to frame protesters as nefarious left-wing mob. I believe, and this is just going off what we just read here a little bit ago in the transcript, he didn't say that he was just referring to protesters. He said there is a select few or a section of people on the left. He didn't say it was just protesters. He didn't say... Now, some of those people were probably involved in the protests. Yes, I believe that was mentioned in there. Some of those people were out doing that. He did not say all of them. And he said that it is a very select group that holds this ideology on the left. It was all about the ideology, not whether they were protesting or not. So he framed them as nefarious left-wing mob that intends to end America. Those opponents, he argued, are engaged in a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. Okay, so you have an opinion on whether or not Trump should have said that, but do you have an opinion on whether or not what he said is true? No, they do not seem to answer that. This whole idea of wiping out history, defaming our heroes, erasing our values, indoctrinating our children, even if you disagree with Trump on most things, you would think that you would see that sentence and be like, yeah, that's a bad thing. And if you weren't doing that, you would be like, well, that's not true. That's not true at all. But there's no mention. They just quote him and move on. On Saturday, in the nation's capital, the Trump administration has planned July 4th celebrations that ignore safety concerns, health guidelines. Okay, they're again talking about the pandemic. Instead, when Trump spoke on Friday night of a growing danger, he was talking about an entirely different threat than rising COVID or coronavirus cases. He referred to the threat as the threat to America's heritage. Rhetoric intended to rev up his base at a time when many Americans are attempting to relearn nation's history with greater attention to the wrongs inflicted on Black and Native American people. Wow. So, again, what they are trying to imply here appears to be that Trump is trying to draw attention away from the bad things that happen to Black and Native Americans in the United States because he only wants to focus on the good and wants us to ignore the bad. You are doing the exact opposite. You are claiming here that Americans are attempting to relearn nation's history with a greater attention to the wrongs inflicted. Now, do wrongs inflicted on these people need to be addressed? Yes. Also, wrongs inflicted on any of the settlers need to be addressed. Also, the good deeds done by any white people, settlers, slaves, or Native Americans need to be addressed. There were all sorts of different people throughout America's history. You have people that tried to, free slaves and treated them right. You had people that tried to, make deals with the Native American people. One colony in particular bought the same land from 3 different tribes because each one claimed ownership of it. I mean, you have all these different stories of people treating people well, but you also have the stories of people brutally murdering other groups of people on both sides, especially with Native Americans and the settlers. Was everyone in the right all the time? Was everyone in the wrong all the time? No, it's not. It's not. There's many different facets to it. There were good and bad throughout the whole spectrum of people in the early colonial days. And with these groups, like Trump addressed in his speech, they're trying to, change the way history is taught with a focus and an emphasis on only the bad. And you can't do that, because then you diminish any achievements you've made and any progress you've made, because you're only focusing on bad things, and you're only focusing on bad things that a specific subset of people have done. You're not focusing on the bad things that anyone else has done, and you're creating a very weird, skewed view of history. You're going to teach history, include every freaking bit of it. Don't pick and choose, include it all. So, again, but that's the issue they take with it. They said Trump was repeatedly using vague pronouns like they and them, and Trump sought to play on the fears of a minority that appears to be shrinking, according to the polls, who view the rise of Black Lives Matter as a threat to the historical dominance of white people. He described the goals of protesters who are attempting to right the wrongs of history as alien to our culture and our values. Again, no. First off, when taking an issue with Black Lives Matter, it's not because it's a threat to the historical dominance of white people. The issues that people have with Black Lives Matter, just to be clear, is not the phrase Black Lives Matter. That phrase is true in and of itself, just like anyone's life matters, right? Of course, the phrase is true, but the phrase Black Lives Matter doesn't represent the organization's beliefs. Now, you might claim to support Black Lives Matter on your idea of what that organization represents. You're like, hey, it's an organization that's just bringing attention to the Black lives in our country and saying they matter. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that in and of itself. But you have to look at what the organization represents itself and what they claim to be. And if you look at the history of Black Lives Matter, and this is something you should definitely go and do some research on. There's plenty of videos out there. I know the Blaze did a special on it. It was very good, focusing on the different, beliefs that Black Lives Matter holds, like their tendencies towards Marxism and the destruction of the nuclear family and things like that. And the things that they push for aren't just about the phrase Black Lives Matter. So no, when people worry about that organization, it's not because it's a threat to the historical dominance of white people. They also say he described the goals of protesters who are attempting to right the wrongs of history as alien to our culture and to our values. Okay, righting the wrongs of history, to be clear, does not mean destroying history and tearing down statues and monuments and changing what we talk about within history. That is not righting the wrong of history. To be clear, all of history should be taught, like I said before, and it should be all laid out for people to make their own, judgments on what happened. And I don't know what they think they are doing that is attempting to right the wrongs of history. Righting the wrongs of history, to me, would be examining what has happened in the past and looking at the good and the bad, taking the good, continuing on with the good, looking at the bad, and saying, hey, you know what? We are not going to do that anymore. We are not going to do this. And that is how you move on as a society. You look at what's good, what's worked. You take that, look at the bad. You don't forget it, but you get rid of it in the practice of it. So nowhere did I see him saying that righting the wrongs of history is alien to our culture and values. Of course, we want to all have a better society, and he talks about that. They address how Trump said their political weapons is cancel culture, which would drive people from their jobs, shame, and dissenters demand total submission from anyone who disagrees. We saw that. They quote him saying, we will expose a dangerous movement. Okay, they're just addressing all his quotes he made here, but they don't really deny any of them, if you notice. It's all just quoting him. He talks about the mantras that the left wing said. Like I said, I read you all these parts, but again, nowhere in here is this denied. It's all just quoted, and they move on from it, kind of like, yeah, he caught us on this, but we're going to ignore that for now. They do a whole section here on how the pandemic is all but forgotten. And like I said, I have that card in the top. You can look at the whole issues with the coronavirus pandemic. On the protecting of the statues, just like he does on his Twitter feed, which is dominated by dismay over the toppling of statues, racist figures from America's past, Trump minimized the dangers of the pandemic Friday night by expressing more concern for the safety of statues than for the American people. No, the issue is not about safety of the statues. If all the parts you just quoted, those are the issues he's addressing. And it's not the statues. He doesn't really care about a chunk of stone or metal. It's not about the safety of the statue over an American's health. If you listen to all the points he addressed how this ideology that is leading people to tear down statues is what is dangerous, and it could lead to more severe consequences than the consequences that are coming out of this pandemic, which again, the death rate is going down. It's another risk, just like we take every day in life with many other things. But they're trying to frame this in a way that makes him look evil and non-empathetic. They quote him talking about the angry mobs tearing down the statues. They say he also waded into the controversy over the legacies of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, two presidents etched in Mount Rushmore. He delivered his own history lesson of sorts on each of the white men chiseled into the South Dakota mountain earlier this week. Trump threatened protesters accused of throwing red paint on a Manhattan statue of Washington, who owned more than 300 enslaved people until he freed them in his will at the time of his death with 10 years in prison. Again, they're trying to get at the point that our founders were terrible, evil people, and they were racist. I encourage you to get into history, read books such as like The Jefferson Lies, anything from David Barton really is really good, or Wall Builders on the history of these founding fathers. They have some really good material on that. The president suggested that the monument towering above him, which includes the faces of Washington, Jefferson, and his former presidents, was also at risk as America reconsiders its past. I am here as your president to proclaim before the country and before the world this monument will never be desecrated. So, pointing out that he's going to protect Mount Rushmore. This is another interesting topic that they get into here. So, CNN saying, the Black Hills, where the monument stands, was a sacred place to Native Americans who lived in the area. Sioux tribes roamed the area for thousands of years, but tribal ownership of the Black Hills was officially guaranteed by the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. The Sioux were soon forced off the land after the discovery of gold in the area. Native American activists have called for the lands to be returned. In 1980, the Supreme Court upheld the seizure of the Black Hills was illegal under the Fifth Amendment. The legal battle continues to this day. Now, that's very interesting that they mentioned that the Sioux tribes are the ones getting it back, because if you look into the history of that, they actually fought and took the land from other tribes in the area. So if the tribes were fighting over the land, you got to figure out which tribe you're going to give it to, right? And then if you do that, I mean, you have to go back, and at what point do we stop going back? Do we go back in time? And do we change things now based on any wrongs that happened in the past? So what if any good came from any of the wrongs that happened in the past? Do you undo the wrongs and then take away the good that came from those? It's this idea of going back and taking away. You would completely take away everything from modern society as we know it, most likely. It's this endless, the sins of the father thing, right? Do you rectify something with future generations that's something that happened with past generations? Me and you had nothing to do with this. We weren't involved with that during that time. Neither were the people who are claiming to, own the land now, and their ancestors took it from other people. So it's just this idea of not being able to, deal with things with the current generation. It's who wronged who in the past, and we have to make amends for that. And you're going to create this constant chain of never-ending reparations for every single thing that's ever been done in the past. You'd have to go back. It sounds insane, right? Like the endless, it would never stop. But that's the other focus here, is that America or white people stole the land from the Native Americans. And that's how they finish out there talking about that. And New York Times has a similar article here that Trump uses Mount Rushmore speech to deliver divisive culture war message. Standing in the packed amphitheater in front of Mount Rushmore for an Independence Day celebration, President Trump delivered a dark and divisive speech on Friday that cast his struggling effort to win a second term as a battle against a new far-left fascism seeking to wipe out the nation's values and history. With the coronavirus pandemic raging and his campaign faltering in the polls, his appearance amounted to a fiery reboot of his effort. Okay. And then he talked about what he talked about. Quote him there. Mr. Trump barely mentioned the frightening resurgence of the pandemic. Again, I have a link to that. Instead, appealing unabashedly to his base with ominous language and imagery, he railed against what he described as a dangerous cancel culture intent on toppling monuments and framed himself as a strong leader who would protect the Second Amendment law enforcement country's heritage. The scene at Mount Rushmore was the latest sign of how Mr. Trump appears by design or default increasingly disconnected from the intense concern among Americans about health crisis gripping the country. More than just a partisan rally, is understood the extent to which Mr. Trump is appealing to a subset of Americans to carry him to a second term by changing the subject and appealing to fear and division. Okay. So again, they're really upset that he's not focusing on the pandemic and, canceling all his rallies, I guess, and not getting out there. And you're saying that he's appealing to fear and division by changing the subject from what we should really be afraid and divided about. Or be afraid about, not divided. So they want him to be afraid of the virus and, not let people go out and, close everything down as they talk about because of the virus. But he's saying there's something in his speech. He's talking about there's something out there to be more afraid of than the coronavirus. And he's talking about this left-wing ideology that wants to fundamentally change America, as we've talked about. And if you're talking about changing the subject, that is what you are doing, news media. You are changing the subject. Nowhere is there denials about what he is saying in any of this. It's not, hey, there's this cancel culture out there that's trying to change America and change our values. Nowhere is it like, no, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we meant by that. That it's known that is what's happening. But instead of, dealing with that, it's let's take the focus off that and focus on the pandemic. Bad. People are getting sick, dying, right? Let's focus on that. And it's irritating. We're tired of it. That's just what they want everyone else to focus on. And this is why I think Trump did this in his speech. Again, like I said, there's things I support him on, things I don't. In this case, with what he said at Mount Rushmore in the specific sections especially I was reading there, I think he nailed it head on. And especially calling out those who are in maybe the silent majority who don't speak up. Maybe they need to start speaking up and voicing their opinion on these things and really let it be known that, no, they don't agree with what CNN is saying there. They don't agree with what the New York Times is saying there. And don't just hope it's going to fly over, because if you are silent and let things go past, and let's say this loud voice over in this part of the left succeeds, then they've fundamentally changed America. That does affect you at that point. And you're like, crap, maybe I shouldn't have been so quiet. But it's the same ideas throughout their article here too. I just wanted to show you that it's not all from the one place. If you want to see Trump's whole speech, they do have it all posted, and you can have here's the transcript here. I can post the link to that if you'd like. But yeah, it's nice to at least see it called out on a large scale like this, other than just, some of these conservative places online. We actually see the president calling this stuff out. Maybe more people will, be alerted to this, and maybe a bunch of people will now start to see what's going on. They'll look into it and start to educate themselves on what a lot of these groups are trying to do. Look into groups like Black Lives Matter. Look into the education system and how they're teaching history right now, and look into a lot of the beliefs of some of these people on the left and see if they agree with a lot of the stuff going on, because I don't think a lot of Americans would. But that will do it for this segment. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you liked the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe. You'll be notified when we come out with new stuff. But that is going to do it. So you guys have a good one, and we will see you next time.